Again, I'd like to now officially welcome all of you to CCDA's Listening Forum. We truly are grateful for this opportunity to have such a diverse attendance to this event. We have began this topic back in July. Those of you who may remember, we met in Los Angeles within our full commission meeting, and we actually cut half of it off to begin a topic of this nature, have a listening forum, which was our first listening forum. And we progressed on saying that we wanted to continue this topic in Sacramento, Northern California. And so indeed, here we are again, taking the time to bring together stakeholders from various organizations and constituencies. So again, we want to welcome you and thank you for coming. I want to at this time introduce to you all our vice chair of the board as he presents also a welcome from the board. And that is none other than Commissioner Vice Chair Doug Wheely.
Thank you, Angela. As Angela said, I'm the vice chair of the commission. I'm the vice chair and chair-elect of California Business Properties Association, which is how I happen to be on the commission. The commission's task, our mandate, is to facilitate communication between the disability community and the business community. And so I'm actively a part of that role and glad to have you a part of the dialogue. I'm grateful that you're here. We thrive on public input. We don't do well when we just sit in our commission hearings without awareness of how all of you are feeling and what you're thinking and what's on your heart. So I'm very grateful that you're here today as a part of the conversation.
Thank you. I will share with you all that our chair had an emergency this morning, and he sends his wishes of wanting to be here, but he was unable to make his flight, and so we do know that he would like to have also given you a welcome. But at this time, I just want to briefly just introduce to you by name, and they can raise their hands and smile a little harder, our board members. So in the audience, we have today with us Brian Holloway. Yes, thank you, that's good. I don't see Walter Hughes. Yes. Scott Littlebridge. Celia McGinnis. Michael Paravagna. And of course, last but not least, Betty Wilson. I want to also introduce the staff of CCDA. They may not all be in here since we're all running around, so let's quickly reach out. Our manager, LaCandace, is over there, operations manager, our analysts, Matthew, Dave, Taylor, and our volunteer has been supporting commission is Darren. Thank you all for making this happen for us, because this indeed would not be as successful as it is without all your tireless work. And so at this point, I want to bring to you our facilitator for the event, and that's Eileen. I just realized, Jacobowitz, thank you. I forgot to verify the pronunciation of that. She has been a sought-after facilitator within the state of California, and so we're very pleased to have her here with us. She's participated in nonprofit organizations and public sector for over 25 years. Her experience includes working with the Department of Rehab and other state officers, such as State of Office of AIDS and the Mental Health Department. So we thank you so much, Eileen, and we will turn it over to her at this point.
I will not use this mic up here since I can't reach it. Good afternoon. Welcome to Curtis Park. Anyone live in the area? No? I live like a mile from here, so I was thrilled when I found out we were doing this here. So welcome. So let's take a look at today's agenda. Let me first say that we are running a little behind, so you might feel a little time crunch, but we will do our best to make this thing work for everyone. We're going to start today with a panel discussion, and that will be just starting in a moment with some experts in the field around disability parking programs. And then it'll be your time to speak, and we'll have some small group discussions. I'll set that up in a little bit. It'll be your opportunity to share your concerns, your recommendations around the disability parking program. And after the small groups, then we'll have an opportunity for some sharing out of the small group discussions. And I want to let you know that because we don't have a full day here and a lot of time for a full and rich, extensive conversation, we do want to make sure that you have the opportunity to provide as much feedback and input as possible. So there's 3 ways. 1, during the rotated discussions in the small groups. 2, you have 2 forms on your table there. 1 is a piece of paper that has the 3 discussion topics that we'll be talking about in the small groups, and we invite you to write your additional comments there. And then we also have a form on there for you to submit questions and comments to our panelists. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions and answers with the panelists, but we do want to get your questions to them, so we'll invite you to submit those, and we'll get those to the panelists, and they can respond afterwards. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, good. So without further ado, let us introduce our panelists, starting with Christina here. Christina Mills is the Executive Director of the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. She was born in San Diego, and she began her post-secondary education while simultaneously pursuing her career in independent living. In 1999, she began working for the Independent Living Center for Orange County. She went on to work for Access to Independence in San Diego and served in a number of positions over the 5 years she was there. In 2001, she was appointed by the California governor to serve on the State Independent Living Council. And as a young professional, she also served as chair of the National Council on Disability Youth Advisory Committee. In 2006, Christina left San Diego to work for the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers as the statewide community organizer of the Systems Change Network. She's led the organizing and planning of Disability Capital Action Day for 7 years and is a co-founder of CFILC's youth organizing program, Youth Organizing YO, right? Disabled and Proud. She's an advocate, an activist, a wife, a mother, a part-time blogger, a novice photographer, a serious scrapbooker, and proudly identifies as disabled. I'm going to then introduce, next up is Andrew. Andrew with the DMV. He's the Deputy Director of DMV's Registration Operations Division and operates the department's Disabled Persons Parking Placard and License Plate programs. He's participated in a number of national, state, and local efforts directed at improving parking access, particularly for the disabled community. He's worked in the field of vehicle registration and related transportation issues for DMV since 1984, since before I was born. When he started answering telephones at a DMV field office between classes at the University of Redlands in Redlands, California. And it looks like you have a partner in crime there.
My name is Armando, and I'm also an employee of DMV. I'm Deputy Director for the Office of Public Affairs.
Thank you for being here. And last but not least, we have Matt Ehrman from the City of Sacramento. He's the City of Sacramento Parking Services Division Manager. He's been doing that since 2014. He oversees a staff of 142 employees, including parking lot personnel, parking enforcement officers, the most popular people in town, parking meter operations, city right-of-way management, maintenance, and custodial operations. Matt was instrumental in the implementation of the City of Sacramento's parking modernization movement. It included overhaul of parking policies, technologies, operations, and equipment, all around helping get the Golden One Center up and running and all the businesses around that. So he's done a lot of technology improvements, including online parking reservations, shared parking strategies, online residential permits, etc. So I'm going to stop talking and give you all the opportunity to talk. And I think, why don't we start with, you want to start with Matt? Okay, Christina votes for Matt going first, so Matt's going first. And Matt says he brought like a 150 slide presentation, but we made him cut it down to 110. Yeah. So it's up to you whether you want to stand or you want to speak from there. Maybe it's easier for you to stand so you can see. Is that?
I only cut it down to 200 pages. So, actually, thank you very much for inviting me today to talk about this very important topic. I am the city's parking manager, and we deal every day in parking, right? So we have quite a bit of parking supply out there, and quite a lot of technologies and techniques that we use to manage the parking. So I thought it would be really good for you to understand how we do that and why we do what we do. So I'm not very coordinated to click the. Yeah. I'll just. Thank you. So we have, as you can see here, we have many different types of parking in our central city, right? We're talking about 30 blocks that are very core to our city. And the division manages both the on and the off street aspect of the city's parking assets. So as you can see, just by the sheer numbers of 25,000 spaces versus 6,200 parking meters don't overshadow the type of parking that we do. So it's not a primary way that we do business in the parking business. In the past 3 years, we've modernized our parking efforts. Eileen talked about some of those things, and we have really changed our focus to really a compliance-based organization. We want people to be compliant. So the purpose of on-street parking is to really encourage the short-term use of the space. Long-term parking works better in parking garages, and it's really a progression of how we deploy those types of regulations. We don't just come out there and put up a sign that says 2-hour parking and think and hope for the best. It's really a collaboration amongst us and the actual business owners, the centers that the parking is around. So we really have those open discussions with people. So as you can see, number 4 is where we install a parking meter. So it's not the first line of defense that we use in our toolbox. So just an example on how a parking meter should work. This is in a little away from our downtown, and you see that non-metered spaces are completely 100% occupied where the metered spaces are not. And this really helps with businesses and the turnover of business. If you own a shop on a street and you're really counting on the parking supply to get your consumers in, then you really want those spaces to be open and available for people to do that. So this is a really good example. You can see non-regulated spaces versus regulated spaces and how it works. Not all parking meters are sitting in here bringing in all that money that everybody talks about. It's just creating access for those businesses. So the role of the parking meter is really to turn over the space. What happens is when you put in regulations, like a 2-hour regulation, you have a lot of people, and believe me, I do not know how they find the time to do this. I wake up on Monday and it's Friday. Every 2 hours, go out to their vehicles and move their vehicles and rotate their vehicles. I just really don't know how there's anything productive then at those places. But when you put a parking meter in there, it really stops that from happening in those metered areas. So we put in a parking meter to avoid those types of situations. It's very typical for us around big employment centers to find 100% of the parking meters used for long-term parking. And it reduces the overall supply. So if we're talking about sheer numbers of supply, and you have over 50% of your supply that's not turning over, it's really not helping the city get to its end goals, right? And as the city grows and expands, the pressure is only going to get worse. So we have Sacramento City Code that regulates how parking meters are installed, the hours of operation, the establishment of meter rates, and it specifies how parking meter and machine funds can be used. So here's an excerpt of the code 10.40.130, use of parking meter and machine funds. So every dime that comes into a parking meter is expended on eligible expenditures. My time, the operations time. So highlighted there talks about what we can use the actual funds on. So what's the role of a parking enforcement officer? Most people would think that the role of a parking enforcement officer is that they issue citations. Well, here's a list of comprehensive duties that are important to the role of a parking enforcement officer. And the important ones are to ensure the safety of the right-of-way. We want to make sure that pedestrians are safe. People block crosswalks. People block sidewalks. We need to make sure that people have access to a safe route. We enforce and regulate accessible parking spaces, making sure that people aren't abusing the systems and the rules. So let's talk about some enforcement we do. Besides the typical enforcement that someone's parked in a space without a blue placard, we also do undercover work as well. We have a dedicated team that, and this is in addition to what Andrew and his team does. We have an actual hotline that we have. We also investigate all complaints, and it's an undercover team that actually goes out there and actually checks credentials, and we issue misdemeanor citations for people that have misused the placard. So here are some of the results of the effort. Since 2005, we've issued 1,500 misdemeanor citations. We've checked 21,000 placards, and that really relates to about 7% capture rate. It is a very difficult job. You have to go out there, you have to monitor, you have to stay on the vehicle, and you have to make sure that that person is abusing that placard. So we also, I want to make sure that people understand that we do have a way for people to report people, and we want to hear about those if anybody would like to let us know of a situation. So how does this affect us as a city and you as a consumer or an employee of the city or working in the city? And the short-term parking's compromised, and really it's locked up, it's landlocked, and it's not doing its job to manage the traffic. We see quite often that people will spend 20 minutes circling blocks looking for parking meters instead of going into parking garages. And this is because, and when I go out there and I look and I see blocks that are 100% taken up and used all day for 8 hours when they were designed to use for 1 hour or 2 hours to support the local businesses, we get the complaints from the business owners and the residents of our city that can't find parking in front of their house because these vehicles are parked for a long time. And it really affects you because even if you are a person with a disability, and you're looking for a space that is nearby your destination, you're often not able to do that because of the landlocked vehicles that are parked there for a very long time. It affects the patrons coming to our city. It really puts a perception that there is no parking out there, and the residents, again, are affected by this as well. And that is my presentation. I hope you took something away for how we operate in Sacramento. Thank you.
So next up is Andrew. You want to do it from there? Or? Yes. All right. Let's make sure that mic's on for you. I'm sure there's a button.
They taped it.
Oh. Do they know you or something? Is
Okay. Hi there. My name is Andrew Conway. I'm the Deputy Director of Registration Operations at the Department of Motor Vehicles. I operate the department's disability parking program. I've done that for about 10 years, either as the deputy or an assistant deputy. The program currently has about 2.5 million participants. And every time I say that, people go, oh my God, it's rife with abuse just because there are 2.5 million people. That actually represents a very small percentage of the California population of nearly 40 million people. It is not a subset of the driver population. Many of my customers are children. Many of my customers are in institutions or nursing homes. They're not drivers. And there's a huge misperception out there that there's somehow a relationship between disability parking privileges and driver licenses, but there's not, and we know that. There's also at any given time about 70,000 people in the state with a temporary disability, recovering from knee surgery, hip replacement, a number of things. And those people are issued red temporary disability placards that are good for up to 6 months. Their physician or the qualifying medical professional will tell us how long to issue one for. We send them out by mail. We also handle them in person in our field offices. And all of our placards, our permanent disability placards, expire at the same time, which makes the program a little easier to facilitate for law enforcement to deal with. It's basically, they all expire on June 30th of every odd year. So last June, all of the placards were replaced, and next June, they will all be replaced. And that's sort of the rule that we follow in perpetuity. It's a big job, so we start issuing them around March, hoping to get all 2.5 million, 2.4 million, whatever it ends up being each year, out to everybody in time for June. We get a large number of them back from people not updating their address because they got one 2 years ago and they don't think to update the address with us when they move. So we surprisingly get well over 100,000 of them returned unclaimed. One of the areas that's a big concern to us is a placard that isn't received by its owner has the potential to fall into the wrong hands and to have somebody misuse. So we work very carefully with the post office during that time of year to try and make sure we get them all returned back if the mailing address isn't good. Another thing to tell you about on the program is the changes that we've made this year in response to both a California State audit report on the program last year and Senate Bill 611, which sort of institutionalized in statute many of those audit findings. We've now moved to requiring identification in order to establish a placard record. We require a true full name of the applicant, either from a driver's license, identification card, a passport, a birth certificate. We will no longer just write out whatever you put down there. One of the primary reasons for this is the necessity of matching up death records that are issued in the state later. If Andy Conway gets a placard, when Andrew Conway finally kicks it, the records won't match. And that's a big problem for us, and that was actually one of the audit findings, was that we're not as good as we could be at matching up death records. The problem with death records is, of course, that if we're always issuing that placard every 2 years and we don't know you're gone, we're sending it to your no-good kid, we're sending it to whoever lived at your house afterwards, and you don't know what's going to happen with it. And so we like to control placard records very carefully when people are deceased. About 70,000 placard holders die every year, so it's a big job. We work with the California Department of Public Health on a monthly basis to update those records. And starting sometime when the Department of Finance approves it, we're going to be working with the Social Security Administration's master death file. We're also looking at third-party data, like looking at credit reporting agencies like Experian, who could tell us much more quickly than government necessarily when someone is deceased. So we're always working to improve that part of the program. The other thing that we had was, as Senate Bill 611 requires periodic renewal of your status. That doesn't mean that a permanently disabled person needs to be requalified, but it does mean that every 6 years, we're going to ask people to come to us and say, I want my placard, rather than just push out an automatic renewal. We're hoping that this will also cut down on the number of placards in circulation that shouldn't be. Lastly, in terms of program changes, I wanted to talk about the audit that everybody noticed that I was under. It was lovely. It was a very pleasant experience. I recommend everybody, at least once in their life, be audited by the California State Auditor. There were 22 findings in that program, or in that audit. We accepted all of the findings. And we had some quibbling about volumes and estimates. For example, they said that 73% of our applicants actually didn't meet the qualifications. We dispute that. We thought it was more like 10 or 15% maybe our staff didn't scrutinize. It's very difficult for us when someone walks up to the counter, they're clearly displaying evidence of a disability. There's a doctor that we legitimately recognize has filled out the form. We don't always get the T's crossed and the I's dotted, and the auditors are asking us to do a better job of that. So if in the future somebody tells you they were a little over scrutinized at the DMV, it's because that's the message that we've been given. So I wanted to go through some of those audit findings. You all probably received the materials here that were distributed ahead of the meeting. One of the first findings was a recommendation that we conduct quarterly audits with the medical boards of California. We've been working with them on setting up a master agreement by which we'll be able to do these audits. The state auditors recommended that the boards conduct the audits, but they've been reluctant to step in and ask their members to police their members. So we're going to take the role on ourselves and develop guidance with them. The second finding was that the legislature should include podiatrists in the program. We found a number of applications that were approved by podiatrists. We never questioned that, and we never realized that they weren't legally authorized. It kind of makes sense if you have major problems with your lower extremities that you would see a podiatrist, and that person would be able to identify you as disabled. But it was an oversight in law that's since been rectified. They also asked that we use the Social Security Administration Death Master File. And as I said, we're right now in negotiations with the Department of Finance to pay for that, which shouldn't be a problem. They're also asking us to have applicants reapply every 4 years. The legislature compromised on that and said that it should be every 6 years. They didn't want people to be overly burdened by this who carry the moniker permanently disabled. They also asked that we include the full legal name and date of birth, which I just explained we're starting to do now. We had a grace period the first couple months of the year. People were still submitting the old form to us. The new form explains this rule, and we've now started to enforce it. So you may see people, constituents, or people that you know in the community who apply and have their application returned. It's because they didn't include a copy of a birth certificate or driver's license. They didn't give us a true full name. And that's what our expectation is now. They also asked that we limit the number of replacement placards. This was a really interesting audit finding. One of the things the state auditor did that had never occurred to me was to count the number of times somebody applied for a replacement. We have a gentleman in the Los Angeles area who lost his placard 22 times last year. And it's clear what he's doing. He's selling them on Craigslist, which I said we should just give him to a room full of disability advocates and leave for a while. Because he actually is legitimately, I have checked his records, he has a legitimate disability himself, and I think he's selling out his community. It's kind of disgusting. So that prompted us to actually purchase some data analytics tools at the department, and we've started analyzing the files. We're now looking for people who do have an excess number of replacements. The legislature has limited it to 4 every 2 years. Anybody who attempts a 5th one will be asked to have their doctor requalify them. But we found people that are asking for 10, 12, 22. And it wasn't just the one guy. It was thousands of people who are doing this. And we suspect some of the placards might legitimately be in high crime areas, lost or stolen, or they may have family members that are sneaking them away. But for the most part, we suspect that these are people selling their access on the black market, and it goes for a pretty penny. We also have been working with some fraud companies that monitor Craigslist, eBay, and other sources so that when somebody presents an ad that would represent one of these products, there's a special alert provided for our investigators to immediately jump on it, check the phone number. It's usually a burner phone, but they will investigate those cases when they're alerted to them. They also asked us to have the health boards check certifications, and we should cancel placards of people who are not, when they are audited, don't follow up within 90 days. This is a recommendation that really didn't get very far, but we do intend to start auditing items and questioning them, and we will cancel placards if people sort of ignore what we discover is an obvious problem. Another important finding, I want to skip through some of these because they're all kind of wrapped up in those interagency agreements that we're doing. They've asked us to analyze data in the system, and I had mentioned earlier that we had we purchased data analytics software. So one of the other things we're doing is making identifying relationships between applicants, looking for doctors that are the common denominator maybe in provider fraud, which until last year, I did not think there was much provider fraud. We're very quietly finding that provider fraud is a significant problem in this state, and we're trying to figure out how to tackle it. One of the biggest problems we have when I work with the California Medical Association and with a number of trade organizations is that many of the disabilities that will qualify you for a placard, they're mobility related, and they're very subjective. If I tell my doctor it hurts when I do that, it's very difficult for my doctor to say, no, it doesn't, because they're not me. And I myself, I have a very bad back. I'm actually looking at back surgery in a couple of months. And the only reason my doctors know I'm in pain or that I'm impaired by my problems with my back right now is because I tell them. They can't look at a scan and it says, there's nothing wrong with him. They do see a problem, but how it affects me is very subjective. And so when I tell a provider you're committing fraud by giving this person a placard, they say, no, I'm not. I'm listening to my patient. And the problem is, well, your patients seem to talk a lot more than his patients. So we've tried to look at rates of access granting for a doctor, I guess you could say. Like, do you issue more than another doctor? Well, if your specialty is geriatrics, if your specialty is spinal issues, if your specialty is podiatry, it's very likely that you're going to be overrepresented in the pool of doctors approving these documents. So that has been a very difficult thing for us. But another thing that we're going to be doing as a result of the audit is providing local police and parking enforcement people hot lists. So beginning this coming December, I think it is, local law enforcement will be able to download from us a file with every disability parking placard that we've canceled. So that as they go down a row of cars, any placard that's in use that we've already canceled, i.e. I get 22 replacements, well, there are 21 canceled placards out there. And so we're going to put them on these hot lists, and local law enforcement will be able to download those files, and as their parking enforcement people encounter placards, they'll be able to know if that placard's been canceled. They'll know if that placard was obtained on the secondary market. And we think that that's going to be a great benefit to them. That was something the state auditors recommended to us, and we're currently underway with. We have a similar program for DUI offenders, people that have 2, 3, 4 DUIs in their record. They're on hot lists, and license plate readers identify these people when law enforcement encounter them driving and they shouldn't be. And so this program will operate very similarly to that. I also thought I would want to tell you some of the things. The other things that we're doing are we're creating a training video for our staff on how to treat people with disability at the counter with respect, and how to interact with people properly, but also how to sift for fraud, how to look at placard applications suspiciously, and but with a little tact, and how we can mark those records and investigate them later. We're also working with our investigators, and Armando is going to tell you a little bit about that because it involves a lot of media saturation. Now, each one of our regional investigations offices does a minimum, I think it's one a month? Yes. Yeah, every office is doing a minimum of one a month in LA, San Diego, San Francisco. They're doing a number of undercover stings. As Matt said, it's very time consuming. The only way to really catch somebody is if you see them at the car, coming or going. That only is going to happen twice in the day, and you better be there when it happens. And that's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to direct law enforcement resources to that activity all day. To give you an idea of some of the things that we're also trying to do as outreach and to better the way our program is received in the community, we've been participating in a number, as you mentioned in my bio, a number of local efforts to try and change public perception, to try and shape public policy. In 2012, I worked with my good friends at SFMTA on a program called SF Park, and they came up with some accessibility recommendations for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. That resulted in some attempts at legislation to change the program. In 2016, I wrapped up a program with the LA Department of Transportation and the Metropolitan Transportation District down there. And they're putting recommendations in front of the LA City Council and the LA City Council is looking at advocating for public changes in the legislature in the next year or so. This past year, I did that UCLA analytics tour that I told you about, and that's resulting in a number of tactical changes in how we operate the program. And this past month, I wrapped up a national effort at best practices for these programs for an organization called the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. They basically took a number of us from all over the country, and we got together and we've produced a best practices document for how to operate disability parking placard programs and how to operate enforcement programs on these. It includes tactical discussions of how stings operate, how government should approach these, what are some of the issues associated with benefits to the parking program. And those are just some of the things that we've done. One other example of something that came out of the audit that Armando is going to speak to is a public outreach program that we are trying to basically shame people into stopping their abuse of this program. And Armando, you want to talk about that?
Sure. And I don't know if this microphone is on. Yeah, it is on. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. And I think you should talk to a Hollywood producer to get onto a 48 hours or something and some of an investigative series maybe. I'm in charge of the Office of Public Affairs of DMV, and as part of that office deals with developing and carrying out different media and marketing plans. And one of them, as Andrew mentioned, is this particular one regarding what we thought to do would be a good thing to do. For many years, the investigators, we have a large number of investigators. I think it's like 300, 400 investigators around the state. And what they do, for many years, they've been doing this operations where they go in a certain area where there's, they get reports of a high number of people abusing the disabled plates and placards. So, but they were doing it at kind of low key. Not too much media would be involved. Once in a while, some media interest. There will be a couple of stories, etc. Well, we wanted to bring it up a notch, and we developed this marketing campaign. It includes a lot of different things. We launched the first part of this awareness campaign in March of last year, and we did it by providing or organizing with investigators. Every time that they would go into a high media market, high volume media market like LA, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, Sacramento, etc., we would alert media ahead of time so they would be part of the campaign. So they would be there when people are being caught using these plates and placards, when they're being cited, etc., to raise more awareness. So we did it last year with operations in the cities that I mentioned, also in Fresno. And what that does, it created a buzz, and it generated hundreds of news reports on TV, radio, and also and those things that we used to call newspapers, and there's still some of them are still around. And we beefed up a lot of our operations well. Some people don't read them anymore. We've been holding, or investigators have been holding, as many as 24 operations each month in various parts of the state. Every month we publicize the results after the fact. of all those operations. We put them together in one document that we call a media release or a press release that we send it out throughout the state, and we keep count of how many people have been ticketed using those plates and placards in an illegal manner. So we keep count, and the number keeps raising and raising and raising. And by then, by doing that, we're also raising the awareness of the other people who might be getting a little bit worried. We're also sending out a public service announcement. We developed a PSA, a video PSA. Some of you might have seen it. It's currently running in some stations, and the stations are doing it for free. We recorded it, we videotaped it with the help of our DAC, Disability Advisory Board at DMV. And I noticed that especially Channel 3 is carrying and airing that PSA quite a bit here in Sacramento and some other stations around the state. The part of the campaign, we also produce brochures that we have in our field office and in several other places. I brought a few. I didn't know how many to bring, but I'll leave them up in the front, and perhaps you can take a couple. If you're welcome to give us a call, and we can provide more for your business or for your office or wherever for your organization. We also created an outreach webpage, a sole webpage dedicated to this problem and this campaign, where you can just click and you can get all the information. You can download our posters, you can download our PSA, you can download everything, and you can do the printing yourself if you want. So all of that was part of the initial campaign, the first phase. The second phase started this month on the 1st, and we created a new slogan and a new emphasis, and this one is more saying, "Save the space." We have different posters. You have one that was the original one over there, and it just says need a written reminder. So we had a lot more emphasis on the citation that people would get by using it illegally.
Let us give Christina some time. We want to hear from you too.
Christina.
So just a quick point, and those stories, I wish I could say that they were unbelievable, but I really do believe them in some instances. Quickly, to Andrew's point on enforcement at the DMV, I just want to point out that at one point, I have a visible disability. I've used a wheelchair all of my life, and yet I was parked in an accessible space with my placard visible and getting in my vehicle when I had an officer approach me and ticket me because I wasn't able to show the little certificate that goes with the placard. So needless to say, ever since then, I have been holding that certificate in my purse, and I understand the importance of enforcement and what having a visible disability and having a placard may not still appear to be enough to an officer who is citing me. I want to thank everybody for inviting the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers to join the conversation today, and Angela for specifically making sure that the disability community was represented here on the panel. Our former executive director, Teresa Favuzzi, she recently passed away. She was very engaged in this conversation, and I understand that the forum that happened down in Southern California was participated by one of our executive directors in the Los Angeles area. So I appreciate that. Again, I'm Christina Mills, the executive director of CFILC, and it's exciting to see that the California Commission on Disability Access is in action. CFILC was one of the organizations that worked to create the CCDA with former Senator Ellen Corbett. I want to talk about a few points, and first I just want to give you a summary. CFILC is a statewide disability rights organization. We've been in California, established for over 35 years, and we serve as both a statewide organization of programs and services to people with disabilities, but also we're very unique because we are the membership organization of independent living centers across the state. So we are serving on an annual basis anywhere between let's hope it never gets that low, and 28 of the independent living centers. Independent living centers are service and program organizations, not places that you live, that are run by and for people with disabilities. And they, through the 28 of them, some of them cover one county, some of them cover multiple counties, but regardless of where you are in the California, you will be served by an independent living center if you so choose. And just to talk about, parking and the future and where we're headed, I think that it's really important that we think about while we are in a world that is continuously changing because of electronics and because of self-driving vehicles and what the future may look like, that people with disabilities are going to be having more of an opportunity to be behind the wheel, so to say. We're really looking at autonomous vehicles as an opportunity for people with disabilities to increase their employment options and be able to be active community members because of the way of the future. And what that means for us is also making sure that infrastructures are accessible to our community as well. Quickly, I just want to share with you a couple of stories as a wheelchair user who's been driving for about, 25 years or so now. I want equal opportunity as much as the next person who's driving a vehicle, but I also mean when I say that I want an accessible opportunity. So when I am going into a city that charges disabled people with placards to pay a fee, I'm going to be okay with paying that fee as a person with a disability as long as I can pay it. Going into a parking structure that doesn't have a service worker there and doesn't allow me to put in my ticket and take out my ticket on my own because of where it's placed is a barrier for me. I am lots of times forced to use metered spots, not because I want the free parking in a metered spot, but because a parking garage might not have an attendant that can take my ticket, or a lot of these new fancy pay machines that aren't accessible to somebody of short stature like myself or a wheelchair user. So that often happens also at gas stations. While we look to the future as the electronic world, we need to also think about how are we creating these infrastructures accessible to people with a variety of disabilities. And sometimes what that means is when you're putting parking pay stations in place instead of a meter that is what is considered easier to some people, making sure that that pay station screen is low enough to where a person using a mobility device or who's short stature can actually use it. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a place to actually pay but been unable to pay, and in some cases cited because I didn't have anybody to explain to that, hey, I want to pay, but your service station is on a curb and it's like a curb with no curb cuts and I can't get on it to pay it. Or that the screen, the electronic screen that tells me to choose between credit or debit is so high or has a glare on it because it's on a tilt that I can't see what I'm actually choosing, and therefore I can't sit there and guess all day what button I'm hitting to figure out what I'm paying or what I'm supposed to be paying. I also just want to point out that accessible spaces are becoming more limited as the future grows. And, I can attest to that personally. We have a new 365 grocery store open in my community. And while I was really excited to get good produce, I'm really bummed out that I have to wait a long time to get that accessible space, because for me that means being able to deploy my wheelchair and have a wide enough space. However, I have to wait now for a longer period of time because of all of those nice electronic, the powered, energy efficient vehicles that took up our spaces. I'm doing loops. I'm now not doing loops for the metered spots because I can't just use the garage down the street. I'm also doing loops around the grocery store because there was a new vehicle parked there that is an electronic vehicle, whatever you call those vehicles, the e-vehicles that you use that have been taking up placard spaces. And I did notice that the emblem on the parking enforcement sign said that it could either be an electronic vehicle, or it could be a disabled vehicle. But my understanding is that you have to have a placard in that vehicle to use that space. So I haven't tried it to be cited yet because I've just paid too many parking fees in my experience of life. Also, I want there to be ways that we can, when we're talking about self-service stations, figuring out, is there an option to call somebody if you need help? And when you do hit the button to call somebody, is somebody actually going to pick up and be available to provide a service that you need, whether it's to pay at that station or put your ticket in to get out of that garage or not? Make sure I hit all of my points. And I also just want to say that I really appreciate people with disabilities being invited to this conversation. And, as we all age, the chances are of us becoming disabled at some point in our life are very high. And I know that for my grandmother, it was very difficult for her to give up her driver's license. And I'm sure it's going to be difficult for a lot more people. But if we have options that make driving more accessible and available for people with all types of disabilities, I think that's about us being forward thinkers and thinking about people with disabilities and the disability community in all conversations, whether it be structural or non-structural systems, pay systems, that we're always taking disability into consideration when we're creating what we think is a better way of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you. Let's hear it again for all of our panelists. We certainly appreciate you being here and all the work you're doing for the disabled community. So we just heard from them, and now we get to hear from you. The hope is that their conversation will inform your conversations in the small groups and provide you some context for your small group discussions and some food for thought. Note that the commissioners have had just a couple minutes to actually summarize things and jot down the theme, so give them a little break if they didn't capture everything. So we're going to start with Commissioner Holloway. Where is he? There he is. All right.
Okay, our plan for summarizing the program innovations was to pick 5 we thought were the more popular ones. So number 1 would be really doing a public awareness campaign to the public about the difference between a van space and a non-van disabled space. There's a big difference. I personally had never noticed that before. And so the point is there's a difference, and try and leave the van spaces available for vans because they really need that extra space. One of the other ideas is taking the placards and integrating RFID devices or photos of the owner of the placard, so that enforcement would be able to either drive by and recognize the plate or the placard, and then also, and this one had a little bit of controversy about it, about having the actual owner of the placard's photograph on the placard. Might clarify some things for some people, might be a little bit of a privacy concern for others. One other idea was allowing, as you can park for free with a placard at a meter, and then yet many times you'll go into a parking garage and you have to pay to get in or pay to get out, and so the disabled spots in the parking garage are really not free. But opening up those disabled parking spaces in parking garages, allow those to be free as well. The 4th item was a public awareness campaign that most people don't know that with a parking placard you could actually take 2 normal parking stalls. I had no idea. You can legally do that. You occasionally might get keyed, but which has happened, but legally, let people know that if there is nothing else available, that you can, with your placard, take 2 spots. And then the last one would be accessible vehicle options for ride-sharing programs like Lyft and Uber, having those being available for disabled customers. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I'm going to walk across the room here. We have the folks on the phone unmuted, right? I mean, we're unmuted, right? Okay. Just making sure. All right, Commissioner Paravanya.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody. This was a great 3 discussions we had. We were looking at, and I'm abbreviating it here, this essentially based on what you've heard today and your experience regarding accessible parking, what's working, and then of course the other side of that, you know, what's not working and what kind of suggestions do you have. And so in terms of what's working, it was kudos to DMV for the program and the work that's been done secondary to the audit. There was a recognition that a lot has occurred in the last few months, and that took a lot of work to make all that happen. There was a sentiment that there's better public awareness. Obviously, there's still a ways to go with that. And that education is better. And one person said that one of the things that he felt was working well were these meetings because of the discussion that comes out of that. And then looking at what's needed, and it's interesting because sometimes things showed up in both categories. Education is needed. Education for building inspectors, planners, the whole gamut, and the public, so that people understand the impact of the built environment on somebody trying to use it. More accessible street parking, a great discussion about whether parking should be free or should be something people pay for, and if they have to pay, should it be on a sliding scale? Interesting issue. Enforcement was seen as lacking, and a greater need for that because people don't feel that there's really a viable resource they have to call when they see that things are going bad. And there was also some concern about the design of garages for parking. So, and the thought was that puts more people out looking for parking on the street if vans will not go into accessible places in garages. But again, my kudos to all 3 groups, all 3 tables, because you guys did a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we're moving on to Commissioner Wilson.
We've had quite a lively, would you hold that for me? We had quite a lively discussion in our groups, and it seems as though I can sort of echo almost everything the other 2 commissioners have done right now. But one of the things that in our group, they talked about technology. We talked about that and how technology can actually help to increase awareness or increase accessibility, access to parking, and to protect the rights of those who legally should have parking and those who are not actually are abusing the system. The recommendations actually come through. If I look at our committees, we have our legislation and our education outreach committee, which would help a lot once we get our a program put together with the help of everybody that would have the legislators hear it and have it get out into the community. The need for education to the medical community, that was another thing that really came across, because someone made a comment that maybe some of the doctors or medical professionals had no clue as to what is acceptable and what is called disability and disability access. We have a long way to go. We've gone a long way. We got a long way to go. I agree with that. We are also looking at the problem, not so much of enforcement, but how DMV could really help with that education, how our community organizations could help with it, our community agencies, and other parts of the government that, protect our civil and human rights. So we kind of really touched on so many things, but technology was a big one. And I I think that's about all we can go with right now because you've already heard a lot of it. It seems like it's a very common thread among all three groups that we need to deal with this from that point of view, of those points of view. Thank you.
Last but not least, Commissioner McGinnis.
Thank you. So I had the good fortune to speak with all the folks on the phone, and we covered all three of the topics. So I'm going to just go through, sorry to have my back to you folks, I'm going to go through the issues that I haven't heard raised on the three different topics. Briefly, starting with parking access, I will reiterate how happy everyone was to hear about DMV's new approach to enforcement and how grateful they were. One issue that was raised is that private parking lots and businesses are refusing to enforce the disabled parking spots, and people would really appreciate it if the DMV and law enforcement would provide education to private businesses about their obligations under law to enforce the disabled parking rules. They also called out government agencies for not providing sufficient numbers of disabled parking spots and called it a systemic problem. The third issue that came up was street parking, where cities provide disabled identified parking spaces, but they either put them in the middle of the block or they do not have curb cuts. And so the disabled person parks and then has to drive in the street in their chair half a block or more to try and find a safe place to go up onto the street, which is a very serious danger. So those are the issues that came up that folks were hoping that the panelists would hear and be able to assist with. In the program management discussion, one person said that they recently had their permanent placard renewed under the new protocol, and they complimented the DMV about how smoothly it went, even under the new heightened scrutiny. So they were grateful for that. One person asked, actually a couple of people with visual disabilities asked if the PSAs that were coming out could be more accessible for people with visual disabilities. And to reiterate what Commissioner Wilson said, people really wanted to know what kind of judgment call doctors were able to make when they issued placards. And I understand that some of the organizations of medical professionals are leery about working with the DMV on these issues, but it seemed to the people that were on the phone that this is a real problem of doctors not understanding both what is needed and what is best practices. And they were really hoping that the DMV would exert extra effort there to educate doctors about both what the laws are on what constitutes a disability and whether a person has a technical disability or has a real need for a placard. And third, they identified another category of misuse of caregivers and IHSS workers using the placards of their employers when the employer was not in the car. So going out grocery shopping and using their employer's placard. And they weren't sure how to solve that problem, but they did identify it as a problem. And lastly, on innovation, apparently in the state of Illinois and in Portland, there's a two-tier placard system where people with mobility disabilities have parking, but they pay for it, and people who have problems with arm function or shorter stature don't have to pay for it because they don't have access to meters or to the ability to pay. And that was just raised as another topic. In addition, people talked about putting an ISA wheelchair sign on your driver's license so that you don't have to carry your little certificate around you don't get cited for not having it in the car. Some people also raised that as a problem with privacy, because if you have to present your driver's license for other purposes, you don't necessarily want to have to identify yourself as a person with a disability. And finally, people asked if the DMV would consider providing education to placard holders when they get the renewal of their placard, to remind them of their responsibility not to let other people use their placard and how to use their placard responsibly. So I thought that was an interesting idea. Thank you.
Sounds like some very lively conversations and a lot of common themes, so thank you for your participation. And thank you to the commissioners for, let's give them a hand, the commissioners for facilitating. And thank you for that. And I'm going to hand the mic to Angela.
We are at the near closing of our session, and I too just want to thank our panelists. You created a great stimulus for this discussion, and the information you provided is invaluable for us because learning new, innovative, and what you're doing and what you're trying to do helps the full community to understand where we're at. And also the reality that we constantly have to be reminded, there is people behind these policies that we're making. So all of you, I thank you so very much. Locally, you're presenting an aspect, Matt, that we here in Northern California or Sacramento, but we do have a variety of folks on the phone as well here in the building that is representing a variety of cities and communities, and all of you have shared and have done a tremendous job in assisting us to help bring information together, because our job as the board is to help legislation, to think about what the stakeholders, what variety of stakeholders are really thinking and considering and are the concerns. So this is, do understand you are providing great support to us as a commission. And so again, I thank you, the commissioners, for facilitating and leading the way on this particular topic. We value it tremendously. Now, I know that we could literally go on the whole day on this topic. And so, as we mentioned earlier, there are cards on the table that if you felt there's something we did not cover, please take the time to write it down. Those of you on the phone or in Zoom, please take the time to reach out to CCDA. We do want to hear from each and every one of you. It is how we best present the information to legislation about the things that the stakeholders are asking or suggesting. So that we do ask for. And then there also, we learn every time we come out. Commissioner Wheely was saying, man, there's a lot of logistical things we do every time, and we try to get better. We really do. But there are opportunities that we know we may miss, and so we look for your responses, your evaluations. So we do have evaluations on the table, and we ask that you please, it is important to us, to each and every one of you, take the time to provide that feedback to us because we do need it. Those are on the phone. We ask that you also send your feedback. We provided on the web for evaluations of how your experience was on the phone. Then I close out to say we have a session where we're calling the coffee chat with legislators. Those of you who can make it back, we appreciate it. We actually, I'm really proud to say, because one of our representatives for the afternoon session for Senator Pan's office is here, and he said, I want to hear the whole thing. And so he came out. I appreciate that from Deputy Director Joe Dibbs. He came and participated the whole time. He will be part of the afternoon session, along with some other assembly and representatives of legislation at 5:30. So again, we thank you. And then last, of course, our facilitator, amazing woman. We just really appreciate how you pulled this together for us. And I thank you so much, Eileen. We look forward to continuing relationships. But now I'll hand the mic back over to you.
Thank you. And I love getting the last word. That's exciting. I just want to talk a little bit more about next steps. So we have the coffee chat coming soon down the hall. And just know that all of the notes from this session, the feedback, the conversation, will be compiled into a report that will be available on the website, and you'll hear more about that. But I just want you to know that this is not being lost. It's being captured. And tune in for more about that. I guess I want to do one more plug to thank the panelists for being here, for your opening comments and your thoughts and your sharing your experiences, and for participating as part of the small group. So thank you very much for that. Where's Christina? Thank you, Christina. And thank you also to the staff for making this thing happen. So thank you very much, and safe travels back wherever you're heading.